the bewitching hour, so we shall commence. First of all, I need you to note that the live stream is not functioning. The meeting will therefore be recorded and will be uploaded as soon as possible. My apologies to members of the public who like to sit down and watch us as we speak, and will have to watch the recorded version. Before we start the meeting, a little housekeeping. Can I please remind everybody that your mobile phone should be on silent or turned off wherever possible. We have no fire alarms planned, so if an alarm should sound, you must treat it as a genuine alarm. Please make your way out of the room and follow staff to the nearest evacuation point. As I'm sure you're aware, our assembly is at the Blitz Oak, just outside and round the corner. Whilst we are in session, please remain focused on the topic being discussed. Questions should be direct and specific to the item that we are discussing. Please try and avoid to repeat points which have already been made. Respect other members of this committee and the position of the chair. Thank you. Right, we're now moving on to our agenda, which as always. Right, first of all, I'd like to receive apologies, please. Do we have apologies?
I've received apologies from Councillor Pole, and I believe Councillor Bennett may be absent this evening as well.
All right, okay. And I believe everybody else?
Yes, otherwise we're out full attendance.
So, welcome. Right, now we get on to the minutes. Okay, so the minutes are the minutes of the 4th of August meeting. I have a written submission from Councillor Ketchin relating to these minutes. Before we move on to that one, does anybody else have any points that they wish to raise on the minutes? No, right, okay. So Councillor Ketchin has asked that his comments on the planning application are altered to have some considerable differences. The first points are the same, that a key balancing figure was a sequential test. No one was in a disagreement that we needed this energy hub. It was unclear what depth ECC had been involved in to scrutinise this. As then requesting an alteration to bullet point 4 to read, he hadn't heard a compelling reason to choose this site and the public had not been consulted, to be added. Next bullet point, some parts of Marsh Barton could be amenable for a harvesting waste stream, and not all options for the site of the energy hub in Marsh Barton had been explored. That last half of the sentence to be added. We then continue as written. This was a great project in the wrong place. Would like to see the sequential test scrutinised, and biodiversity was not a material consideration for this site. It would easily be done, but building an industrial site in the middle of the area would hinder this. So the only alteration on that bullet point would be to include the word not between was and a. There are then two further bullet points to be added. First one is the original plan for the hub was 2.5 acres and the new site has expanded over threefold. Second bullet point to read, the remainder of the Grace Roads playing fields being outside of the red line boundary should have been clarified as neither a material consideration and not consulted on with the public. That concludes the amendments. Is it okay that I have read those out? Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Atkins.
Could I just confirm whether Democratic Services have confirmed they are accurate according to the recording and their notes at the time? Because we don't want a situation where people can rewrite.
Yes, I've gone back through the recording of what I've picked up for that meeting, which I wasn't in attendance for, and I believe that does appear to be mostly correct from what I picked up from the recording. But the audio was difficult for that meeting, so I picked up what I could, and I believe that's correct.
Thank you.
Take your mic, please, Mike. Thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, there was something that hasn't been said, and I distinctly remember him saying there is never any justification to concrete over green space, green land, even for climate change. That is not bullet point. He very clearly made that point, and I think that is a very pertinent bullet point which has been omitted.
I don't really want to go through a little bit of a ding dong, but Councillor Ketchum, would you?
I would just say that if I have to be quoted by someone else, I would absolutely want that clarified because
Absolutely.
I don't recognise those words.
As I say, Democratic Services did very assiduously go through the recording, particularly at the times when you were speaking, Councillor Ketchum, and has pulled those bullet points out based on that. And you have submitted your own rewriting of one particular paragraph. So again, I am submitting that those amendments are put into the minutes.
And could I also ask that Democratic Services say if that listen to the recording for future purposes, whether it's not in the minutes or not? I think that's a very important statement that you made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Atkins. All right, that being said, I'm now proposing the minutes as amended of the meeting on Monday, the 4th of August. Can I ask for a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Mitchell. And now can I have an indicative vote whether you are in favour of those going in? Those in favour? Okay, I see an agreement from all those present.
That's 10 in favour to
Yes.
approve those amendments.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. I will sign those later.
Check.
Put that into Okay, we're moving on to number 3 on our procedure agenda. So that's declarations of interest. Councillors are reminded the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests that relate to the business on the agenda. Now, looking now and asking if anybody wishes to make such a declaration, and seeing no hands. Number 4, Local Government Access to Information Act, exclusion of the press and public. This is an open recorded meeting and I see no reason at all to exclude press and public. We're now moving on to agenda item 5. This is our planning application 250318 FUL, former site of 26 to 28 Longbrook Street. As we move into our new procedures, we are on we're now at stage 1, which is public speaking, and we start off with the councillor speaking under standing order number 44. I have Councillor Palmer. Councillor Palmer, could you approach us, please? Good evening, Councillor Palmer. You are free to only start whenever you're ready. You can get yourself as organised as you like. I will remind you that under the new procedures, we are only allowing you 5 minutes. After that, there will be an opportunity for us to ask questions on matters that you have raised, and that period will also be of 5 minutes. So whenever you're ready, Councillor.
Thank you, and thanks very much, everybody. So I'm aware, obviously, that this has a very lengthy planning history. It predates me, predates probably lots of us in this room. But I think, as I and others have made clear in our objections, this is a new application rather than simply an amendment to the previous consented planning application. And I think much has changed in terms of the student accommodation landscape since that original planning permission was originally granted. And obviously, we now have PBSAs dominating much of the city centre and even more planned. So I want to focus this evening on community balance. Now, obviously, the National Planning Policy Framework does promote mixed communities. It requires local planning authorities to plan for a wide mix of housing types, tenures and sizes to meet the different needs of different groups within the community. And the goal is to create inclusive, well-designed places with accessible services, fostering vibrant communities and sustainable development. Now, I would argue that this development achieves none of that. The St James Neighbourhood Plan is very clear about the important role that St James plays within Exeter. It's quite unique. It has its own distinct character, identity and role. It's predominantly residential. It is literally, the gateway into the city centre. So it has an important future role to play for families, for professionals, for lots of different people who want to come live and work in Exeter City. Now, it's accepted, I think, by all of us that, you know, we will always bear the brunt of the majority of students. We live, you know, in such close proximity to the university, and students are very welcome. They form, you know, very much part of that vibrant community, but only if that community is sustainable and balanced. And I think we all accept that St James is anything but. So we have more than 50% of transient student residents. That is more than any other ward in the city. And there's this lazy argument, I think it's been used again here by developers, that PBSAs mean that HMOs return to residential use. Well, I cannot find any evidence that supports this happening anywhere in this country, and St James has certainly seen no decrease in HMOs. Now, currently there are 17 HMOs listed for sale in St James specifically. Every single one is marketed as an HMO investment, and they're mainly terraces that would have been 3-bed family homes. They're all being sold now at 5-6-bed HMOs for around £500,000-600,000. There are only 5 houses for sale privately in St James. 3 of those are small terraces. They're on the market for under 300k. So you are not, are you, realistically going to buy an HMO that requires a huge amount of investment for 600 grand, when actually elsewhere in the city you can pick up, you know, your terraced house for, you know, under sort of £400,000. So there are also almost no rental properties in St James either. There are 2 currently on the market that are not student HMOs. They are both very small flats, so there is no family-sized rental accommodation in St James either. Now, community balance was actually one of the key points made by both council officers and subsequently the appeals inspector in a case in St James last year, which was to refuse a very large garden HMO development. And the inspector noted that he had no doubt the immediate area around the appeal site already contained an imbalance in the community weighted towards students, and that proposals would add to the over-concentration of student accommodation in the immediate area, creating a further imbalance, undermining the objective of creating a balanced community. He added that the harm would outweigh any benefit from the provision of further student accommodation. He also noted that the council wasn't achieving its target of ensuring that at least 75% of increase in student numbers were accommodated by PBSA. Therefore, it's accepted that we do need more PBSAs. However, this need had to be weighed against other plan policies, including Plan C3 of the St James Neighbourhood Plan, which sought to avoid an over-concentration of student accommodation that harmed the balance of the local community. Now, the vast majority of houses on Longbrook Street are occupied by students already. There are 12,500 PBSA beds in Exeter. The vast majority of those are either in my ward or they sit on its fringes. And that's in addition to hundreds of student HMOs. So let that sink in, that's 12,500 PBSA beds that already exist within a very small locality. Now, the site should be developed. It's a key site in the city centre. And I'm not, you know, when I talk about community imbalance, it's not in a NIMBY-ish way. There is genuinely a significant issue with community imbalance in St James, and it has a very detrimental impact on the lives of residents. We absolutely want this site to be developed. You know, it's an awful mess at the moment, isn't it? It's a key site into the city, but actually providing that permanent residential home that people of Exeter really need is the thing that I would urge you to support this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Members, do you have questions of Councillor Palmer? Councillor Banyard.
Have you found any evidence when you're talking about the 12,500 student beds, any evidence of under occupancy, so that is there already an oversupply of these things in the city?
Inquiring minds would love to know, because actually I don't think anybody knows the answer. So many of them are privately owned, so actually there is no kind of central place that we can get the data from. Anecdotally, they are not, you know, my understanding is they're not fully occupied. So what we do see obviously are lots of international students will remain in PBSA for 3 years. We know that lots of first year students, you know, will rightly probably want the safety and security of a PBSA in their first year. Actually, due to the cost of them, most want to move to, to HMO type housing, which is generally slightly cheaper, and obviously you get to party with your mates a bit more there. So anecdotally, we know that PBSAs we don't think are full, but actually it's very difficult to give you factual information there, I'm afraid. I wish I could.
Councillor Harding.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Palmer, for telling us that. And it's interesting to hear that. Some really valid points, I think. But you said in your closing statement that you urge to support residential accommodation there, but that's not what we're discussing tonight, because the only thing we've got on the table tonight is the PBSA. That's all that's on the table. But do you have any suggestion or any idea how? Because at the moment the developer, that's what they're putting in. So there is no application for residential. Have you got any thoughts on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan actually, because I think they're not priced fairly. But build to rent, if we're looking at accommodation that is absolutely needed in the city centre, if we look at, let's be honest, we're only going to be able to put flats, so we're not going to be able to put houses there. But actually, if you think about the accommodation, perhaps that young professionals, wanting to kind of live right in the city centre, where they should be enjoying themselves. Build to rent for me would be a much more viable option on this site, and it would have that kind of long-term sustainable future. People will always need a long-term home. So actually, if those residents, kind of move on and buy their first homes, whatever, you're still going to have a complete, ongoing supply of people that want to live there.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? I'm not seeing any, so I really thank you very much indeed, Councillor Palmer. I believe I have already done that, and I do appreciate it. Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Moving on with our public speakers, we have a speaker objecting, and that is Mrs. Robin Connett from Exeter St James Community Trust. Again, Mrs. Connett, welcome. You relax, get yourself organised and start whenever you are ready. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, and then there will be a further 5 minutes allocated for questions to you based on comments that you have made. Thank you very much.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed for allowing me to come. I think you should all have received file, so it may be helpful to have a look at some of the those files as we go through. I fully endorse everything that Councillor Palmer has said regarding the proposed PBSA use and the problems with community balance in St James, and in fact I think beyond that. But I need within this time available to focus instead on issues relating to design. I believe that this is not only good, it's not good enough for the community of St James or the intended student occupants, but it's not good enough for our city centre, and it's not good enough for the Longbrook Conservation Area. As Councillor Palmer has said, the site, which actually is 26 to 28 and 30 to 32 Longbrook Street, I don't know why the 30 to 32 keeps getting left off. That seems quite important to me. But the location is really important. It is high profile. I think all of the design experts that we've spoken to agree with that. It's within St James, but it is right on the edge of the city centre. It's the gateway to the Longbrook Conservation Area, which is just 40 metres away, and vice versa from Longbrook Street. It is the gateway to the city centre. Two quite different environments, and it must be sensitive and it must enhance both. So it's adjacent to John Lewis at the southern end, and at the northern end, down Longbrook Street, it's adjacent to a terrace of very modest 3-storey properties, each with a commercial use at the ground floor. I'd like you to think of the eastern elevation. This is what you would see when you come down King William Street. And remember, King William Street with King William Street car park is actually a very important route for visitors to the city in particular. They need to come down there. And at the moment, I think we're all aware that the rear of the Siddle Street properties there is not giving a good impression. Neither is the John Lewis service yard. And this new proposal, this development, the eastern elevation of it will be there in view as people come to the car park. Let's make sure that that building sets the precedent of good quality, really high quality, for when the rest of that area gets developed. We want to be proud of the city, so let's bear that in mind. It also is viewed from Bailey Street, coming down from Rougemont and so on, so it is a very important site. As Councillor Palmer has said, it is badly neglected at the moment, and of course we would all want to see it developed. But this must not be at the expense of highest quality, particularly in that position. So, planning history, I think it, as far as design is concerned, it is actually very important. The proposal has derived from that which was approved at Planning Committee in October 2017, and I happen to be there, via renewal of the unimplemented permission in 2020. Now, this is interesting. I agree with this. Devon Archaeological Society's consultation response explains the originally permitted proposal subsequently saw numerous alterations via at least 7 further revisions to the plans, which were nodded through as minor amendments and a variation of condition to replace the approved drawings. The present application has a good deal of common ground with that application, and so recognises that the many changes and variations which were deemed minor effectively amounted to a wholesale redesign of the building, resulting in the aggrandizement of the development to the detriment of community amenities. Spot on, I think. We are incredibly relieved that this new application means that the site and the development is finally being brought to Planning Committee. We found it bewildering that you were not given the opportunity to scrutinise many of the changes that were approved along the way and to decide whether they were acceptable on this important site. This even included significant changes to the use and appearance of the ground floor. The ground floor was designed to be commercial. The whole frontage from John Lewis right the way down to the Longbrook Street properties was to be commercial. Dual height restaurant with the possibility of a mezzanine floor with double height windows adjacent to John Lewis so that it looked in keeping with the city centre, going down to single story level at the other end, but all the way.
Mrs. Collett, I'm afraid I must ask you to wind up your 5 minutes. But if you
Okay.
want to make a final comment?
Okay, I will make a very final. There are many issues that are involved. The height is a mistake within the officer's report and within the planning statement. The original was not 8 to 9 stories, the approved one, not 8 to 9 stories. It is lower than the current proposal, and you will be able to see, if you wish, on the drawings I've given of how that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Collett. Members, do you have questions, please? Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor.
Thank you. You spent a lot of time discussing the former the extent application that's already been approved on the site, and you've talked about the attitude of the St James Forum to the current application and concerns about the current application. Could you just clarify for us what your attitude was to the 2015? Have you taken a consistent approach from 2015 to now about any disagreement you've got with this development on this site?
We welcomed the involvement. There was tremendous involvement over a period of time involving the review panel, which was consulted genuinely over repeatedly, and as the design and access statement for that that proposal will reveal, there was movement back and forwards, and improvements were made all the time. Very clear design principles were set out, a clear rationale. This is something actually that the design review panel, slightly different panel, but which was consulted by the current applicant only a month before they submitted the application. And although it claims in the planning statement that it has responded to everything that was said, the design panel actually gave 19 recommendations. And the first of these, am I allowed to read it? Yeah.
Just on a simple answer, in effect, are you saying that you do not support the current application and you did not support the 2015 application? That's what I said. There's a consistency in that your approach is
Right.
both the previous one, however it ended up, but the previous one as it started, and the one now did not have the support of the St James Forum.
This one we do not support for many reasons, community balance particularly, and also definitely design. The previous one we did not approve because of, or support because of community balance, but we eventually thought that the design was perhaps the best that could be got at that time.
Thank you.
It's just something you mentioned in your objection, or I think that I saw something that you'd written that you haven't had time to discuss today. But as I understand it, St James Forum was originally set up to manage Queen's Crescent Garden, and there was a feeling that if this development went ahead, that some of the money, the green space money, should be towards that, given it's the obvious place, a green space that will be enjoyed by the residents rather than all to Exeter City Council parks. Have you had any correspondence from the City Council with regard to that?
None whatsoever.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming along and speaking. I'm sure it's very daunting. I just had a question regarding the commercial ground floor frontage that you talked about. Could you tell me a bit more about what your concern is around the commercial frontage of the ground floor that you mentioned in your speech, but then sort of didn't have the chance to develop? I'm just trying to understand what your issue is with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Because of its location, I think that many of us would think we don't really want to, at pavement level, you would like to think that you could see in, there's an active frontage, not just watching out from inside, but penetrative, that people passing by, shoppers in Exeter, visitors, can actually go in. It is public space, retail, you know, that go into a restaurant. And at pavement level, you would have no idea, perhaps, that it was public, that it was PBSA accommodation above. Now we are coming to what's happened now. There is just a small cafe. The rest is entirely devoted to the student accommodation, including the doors to the plant, the doors to bike storage. Is that what we really want to have on the frontage? And then an expansive window into the students' reception and communal area. Now, there's very little communal space there for the students, very little. Do they want people to be looking in? Of course they won't. So it's probably be darkened glass. What does that say at that particular location in Exeter? It's not appropriate.
Thank you. We have a few brief seconds left. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about, Queen Square, because it is dealt with in the report, why that hasn't, Section 106 agreements weren't attended to them from PBSAs. Are you aware that students actually use Green Square?
Queen's Crescent Garden, they use it a lot.
They use it.
Yes.
And so what would the contribution be that you're looking for? Because there's obviously been a lot of work being done on it recently.
Well, that is something that we haven't gone into. We would welcome discussion we would welcome discussion, not just section 106, but also with
But you haven't identified a need for money at the moment.
we have a big need for money. We're needing to raise about 250,000 for to complete the regeneration of the master plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Corbyn. Right, I have no other public speakers listed, so we now move on to an officer's report. The officer report, please. I'm sorry, you're not registered as a speaker. So I'm really sorry, I'm afraid we do have a series of protocols, all of which are available for discussion, and you could have contacted members of planning beforehand in order to have this explained to you. You need to be registered as a speaker, and then you would be given your 5 minutes. So I'm afraid I have no other speakers. And there is a link quite clear on every one of these applications about speaking at a planning committee. I'm very, very sorry. I'm afraid I can't allow you to speak. Okay, there being no other speakers listed, we move on to the officer's report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I try and get this working. So this application is for a 9-storey building consisting of ground floor cafe and 108-bed purpose-built student accommodation. It's located in the city centre, adjacent to John Lewis and on the corner of Longbrook Street and New North Road. The site previously contained the King Billy pub and a coach repair garage, both of which have been demolished down to ground level. The address raised by the St James Community Trust in their speech, the address issue is not necessarily an issue with planning applications, with the planning application applying to the red line of a site location plan, and that is what any approval is secured to, not any address points. There is a precedent for a PBSA block in this location with 2 previous approvals, one in 2017 and the other in 2020. The 2020 approval is still extant due to lawful commencement through the demolition of the King Billy pub. However, it cannot be built in its current form due to increased building safety requirements. The 2020 approval was for the same number of bedrooms, and the maximum height of it is the same as being considered today, and I've got a slide to show you that later on. It's important to note that this is a new scheme and not an amendment to the previous developments, and should therefore be considered on its own merits, although with the precedent of acceptability from the previous approvals. This is the existing site as it is. Medieval wall at the back of it, which I'll discuss later. This scheme has been through pre-application with the council, it's been through design review panel, and there's been additional revisions during the application process itself. The applicant has worked closely with the council through this whole procedure, improving the scheme based on the variety of recommendations that are put forward to them. The cafe is on the southern ground floor of the site. The exact layout of it and facilities for it would be determined by the eventual operator and any environmental health licensing requirements. This is welcomed in this location to provide an active frontage and to encourage people in and around this area. The rest of the ground floor consists of a student reception area, plus bike store, plant room and bin stores. All deliveries, large deliveries and collections would be from the service yard to the rear, the John Lewis service yard, that hopefully you can see me wiggling my mouse. Any deliveries for things such as Amazon or your small parcels would be expected to use the loading bay parking on Longbrook Street opposite the site. Having visited other similar developments and discussed the management of that with their site managers, There are notes taken from delivery companies on where parking should be done for the delivery. So whilst there might be initial teething troubles, it should be long term. They will know to park in that location. The 2nd to 7th floor, they are all student rooms with an accessible room. And the 8th floor is student rooms with a second shared amenity space. The rooms are smaller in size than the nationally described space standards. However, they are similar in size to other PBSA developments in the city. This is acknowledged, and this is the standard practice due to access to additional facilities at the university, and that it is not their permanent residence. Due to the constraints of the site, it's not possible for any outdoor amenity space to be provided. This has been found to be acceptable because of their access to facilities at the university, and it has been agreed with the applicant to improve the public area to the southwest of the site, outside the John Lewis area, with a seated planter similar to this picture here. The technical details of it are proposed to be secured via condition. To the rear of the site, there is a medieval wall, which is not nationally or locally listed. However, it is still of historic significance. Due to safety issues during the demolition of the King Billy pub, this had to be partially demolished, and this was considered to be acceptable and necessary by the Council's Historic Environment Officer. The previous scheme proposed building up to the edge of this wall, which is highlighted in red here. However, this proposal brings the development away from that wall. There is a pre-commencement condition for a heritage management plan in order to secure details of conservation and recording of the wall, alongside archaeological watching brief and monitoring for vibration impacts on the underground passages, which are to the south of the site. Concerns have been raised regarding the height of the scheme. The proposal has the same maximum height as the previous approval. However, there is an increase in massing on the upper floors. Just skip through the elevations here a second. And that is the 2020 extant permission and the proposed scheme. Apologies, they're slightly skew if they seem to have shifted slightly since I last looked at them, but having measured it and confirmed it, they are at the same height at the central highest point. Because of the ground level changes, it's difficult to confirm the exact height at every point, but this central area here is at the same height as proposed. The following slides, just skipped past them. The previous slides showed the elevations and the 3D imaging of the scheme. As stated in the officer report, the applicant has worked with the council improving it, and this included detailing of the upper floors, as well as changes to the upper aspects, materials, the positioning of the increased massing, and linking the horizontal aspects better with the neighbouring John Lewis building. In relation to the community imbalance of the area, this is set out in detail in the officer report, and there is quite a bit of information on that that's included in paragraphs 19 through to 53 of that section of that report. The city centre is identified in policy as a preferred location for PBSA, alongside a requirement to provide PBSA to meet the demand of increased student numbers. The university has continued to expand, and this doesn't appear to be slowing down at all. We've checked, and there is no evidence that numbers are dropping at all. The current calculations show that since 2006-2007, 103% of additional student numbers have been provided within PBSAs. However, this will drop to 92% by 2028-29, based on the projected student growth and the PBSA accommodation currently in the pipeline. This also doesn't take into account existing student numbers in 2006-2007, which policy desires to also be cited in PBSA where possible to release existing HMOs back into the housing market. With regards to imbalance and over concentration itself, The local plan has no clear definition of imbalance, overconcentration, or what an area of the city is, and there's no clear measurement of how it should be assessed. The recent appeal mentioned at Howell Road was for a PBSA block, and that was allowed with the inspector noting in that area that 4 PBSA blocks within 250 metres of the site would not create an imbalance. The appeal noted by Councillor Palmer appears to relate to an HMO, not PBSA, and the references to the St James Neighbourhood Plan would therefore not apply. Policy C3 was referenced, which applies to small-scale PBSA or HMO development, and whereas St James Neighbourhood Policy C2, which this would fall under as a large-scale PBSA block, does not include any reference to balanced communities within it, and that was a key point picked up by the inspector in the Howell Road appeal. In relation to this site, we've done a broad assessment of PBSA blocks in the neighbourhood within 250 metres of the site, just drawn as a circle from the centre of the site. There are 7 PBSA blocks, 5 of which are within 150 metres of the site. However, the surrounding area also contains a range of other housing types and uses, including flats, terrace dwellings, and commercial units. The city centre is identified in policy as a suitable location for PBSA, and it would therefore be expected that a higher level of PBSA would occur here than in other areas. In this instance, it is considered that the level of PBSA is acceptable in this location and would not result in any overconcentration or imbalance. It should also be noted that PBSA now counts towards the council's housing land supply. The council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore the tilted balance in favour of sustainable development is in effect. The application is therefore respectfully recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the officer report and subject to signing of the Section 106 agreement, which requires contributions towards GP surgeries, implementation of the local, costings towards the local energy network implementation, cycle infrastructure improvements, and a management plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move into questions, can I please remind everybody that we are meeting and discussing this, and there should be no comments off or other distractions for the members. Thank you. I have questions from Councillor Mitchell, from Councillor Atkinson, and then please wait for me to write them down. Okay. Yes, so we'll start off with Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you for your, as I say, very full report and presentation. Could I just clarify the situation on the service yard at the back of the property? My understanding that is owned by Exeter City Council and leased to John Lewis, who have currently allowed porta cabins to be put there to enable the demolition to be undertaken. According to what you were saying, it was implied that this development, if it takes place, would have permanent access by that service yard. Is that so if John Lewis have got the lease on that yard? That's the first question. And do you want to deal with that first?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that is the case. That large deliveries, so the waste collection and things like that, would all be via that service yard. The agreements for access to it would fall outside of the planning. It would be up to John Lewis and the relevant department of the council to come to an agreement with it.
It would certainly be an issue if they couldn't get access. Secondly, you haven't mentioned any time. I walk past this building every day, or lack of building, should I say. What is the position regarding the gap between the side of John Lewis and this building and the windows at the far end of John Lewis, when you're supposed to have, there was, I understood, 22 metres gap between windows and also right to natural light. So how are they impacted on the far end of the John Lewis building by this building growing up beside them?
Are you referring to the impact on John Lewis from the building, or on residents of the proposed development from John
both?
Lewis?
I think it's a matter of, you've got windows along the whole side of the John Lewis building. They're now being obscured by this building. I'm unclear how close this building is to those windows and whether it forms any form of infringement, because traditionally when we're dealing with households, we insist on a 20-metre or 20-yard gap between overlooking windows. And I just wonder what the position is here.
So that 22-metre recommended distance would normally be for distance between habitable room windows, and would apply to normally dwellings rather than a commercial use such as the John Lewis building. I have looked at the angles for the occupants from the John Lewis, and there didn't seem to be any significant overlooking issues for occupants. But we wouldn't normally have worried about looking into the John Lewis building for this type of development.
Any other comments, Councillor Mitchell? Okay, I have Councillor Atkinson next, please.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. You answered several of my questions, so I've only really got two left. What was mentioned by the St James Association was design, and you did mention that it'd been to the design board. So are you very clear that the current design, which does look more attractive than the last design to my own eyes, meets local design codes and neighbourhood plan codes and national planning policy in relation to design? So if that's if you'd answer that in the affirmative, that would be very helpful. And then secondly, coming back to this question of Queen Square, I note from your report that Exeter City Council did ask the developer for a contribution towards parks and open spaces, but this was declined. So I think that answers the question about, you know, our response. We have pursued this according to your report. Is there any opportunity for reopening that discussion in view of the proximity of this particular development to that Queen Square?
So in relation to your first point, it's been through the design review panel, and the council's urban designer has been heavily involved throughout it, and has supported the changes that have been done, and they're very happy with the design of it as it has ended up.
I asked, does it meet all those design framework?
There's no specific requirements in terms of design, other than it's got to be a high quality design and things like that. It is considered to be high quality design, and there's been no objections raised by our urban designer on it. In relation to Queen Square, the council's Public and Green Space officer requested a contribution, and it was not for Queen Square. They asked for a contribution towards improvements to Northern Hay Gardens. We would not normally seek to reopen it at this stage. There is the potential for discussions with the applicant regarding it, but there is a precedent that student blocks have not contributed towards public and green space improvements in the city in that manner. With other schemes that I've dealt with, where there's been co-living, that has contributed towards it because they don't have access to the same facilities that students would. But for student accommodation, it's generally been accepted that they would use the university's facilities instead.
Chair, I want to point it back quickly. Could we just point out it's Queen's Crescent Gardens in our ward? We take the money if there was some, go elsewhere. It's Queen Crescent Garden.
I have Councillor Hughes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you as well for your presentation. Super helpful, as always. My question relates to this idea that, and I'm calling it an idea, that the development will be car-free. Because whether we encourage it or not, students will bring their cars. That I think we know that happens a lot. So my question to you really is this, making this car free, is it likely to impact on surrounding parking availability, do you think, especially because there are accessible rooms mentioned? So I'm imagining, and I could be stereotyping, but I'm imagining those residents in accessible rooms might not necessarily be in a position to get on the back of a bike. So I'm wondering if this is going to have any kind of impact, whether it's positive or negative, on surrounding car parks or on-street parking. I think we do need to kind of take that into account when it comes to highways and stuff when we're making planning decisions. If that's okay, thank you.
So in relation to on-street parking, it's predominantly parking permits in the surrounding area, and they would not be issued parking permits for this property. We would expect that the management plan that would be secured by a Section 106 agreement would require residents to sign up saying that they are car free and that will not be bringing a car. We've adopted that approach with other PBSA blocks in the city. Obviously, there may be exemptions to it in relation to the accessible rooms, but there wouldn't be any significant impact on parking in the surrounding area.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Harding.
Thank you. I've got 4 questions. I had a couple more, but you answered them already. Thank you. So, shall I ask one at a time? Is that the best way?
Yes, please.
Lovely. All right. Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, my first one was on page 10 of the report. At the top of that, it says that at the bottom of the first paragraph, it finishes by saying it does create an overconcentration of PBSA, but then on the top of page 13, it says it doesn't. So I just wanted a bit of clarification on that, please. Or that, unless I'm looking at 2 different things.
Yeah, is that in the assessment part of the report, or is it elsewhere? I'm just
in the table of. Oh right, yeah. So I'm not sure. It's not in the table of key planning issues. It's just at the top of page 10 of the report, as it's numbered on the report.
First paragraph does create an overconcentration of PBSA.
Line 5 of page 10.
That would be a typo error with that.
Oh right, so there is no overconcentration.
No. As the report goes into detail later on, that would be a typo in the.
Okay, yeah.
I apologise for that mistake.
Yeah, all right, lovely. Thanks very much. The other one was somewhere I read it says the demolition of the wall of the part of the medieval wall constituted starting the development, I think, of the 2021 application or the 2020 application. So does that mean that that application has started? But my other thought about that was the fact that you said they had to some new regulations to come into effect, so that application was no longer valid. So what my point actually is if this one was refused today, then could they just fall back on the 2021 or the 2020 application and say, well, we've got this one anyway, so we can build this one instead?
So the commencement of work was through the demolition of the King Billy. The works to the medieval were an accidental part of that.
Okay.
So that permission is extant. However, due to the changes in building safety requirements, they wouldn't be able to build it in its current form. So it is a live permission, but it can't actually be built as approved. That being said, there may be potential for amendments to or things like that if they wanted to go down that route, but that would need a new application, and we'd have to assess whether it was actually possible to do it under a Section 73 application.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And the other thing was about the loading bay, because one of in Bartholomew Street, there's a reasonably new block of student flats being built, and they've got quite a big lay-by just off the road onto the footpath where I suppose people can drop students off, like when they're moving into these places. So I just wondered so somebody moving into this accommodation, where would they park their car? Where would they stop to drop off their belongings?
At the moment, we would be expecting them to, we would expect the applicant to submit a moving in, moving out plan. That would be part of the management plan, and we would be running that past Devon Highways to make sure that wherever it is that's chosen is the suitable location. Obviously, on street isn't necessarily going to be appropriate there, or if it is in that loading bay, it might be that it's 10 minutes at a time. It's literally they just get it out of the car into the reception, and that's it. But at the moment, it would be something we'd require via the management plan.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's good. And then there's one last question. On page 55, where the management plan makes some references to the building work, and this is something that we've benefited, I think, greatly from in Alphington, where agreed routes have been set out. So it's quite easy to say, no, you've got to go that way. But there didn't seem to be any agreed routes for construction traffic. So can we have something added? I don't think that one's been completely decided yet, but can we have something put in there so that construction vehicles aren't maybe coming up and down Longbrook Street, but using whatever you would say was the main road, so I guess New North Road and Paris Street? was on page 55 of the report. It didn't seem to say any route on there they were allowed to use.
There we go. Just going to check the condition wording a second.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you.
So as part of it, we have the construction management plan condition. Point L of that states that they have to supply the proposed route of all construction traffic exceeding 7.5 tonnes. So we would be expecting that as part of the management plan that they have to submit to us.
Thank you. I probably misunderstood how that works. So yeah, that would be done then at a later stage. Brilliant.
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. Councillor Ketchin.
Massive issues, no big curveballs. In no particular order. There's £30,000 earmarked for heat network. Can I ask who that money goes to?
I believe there is the heat, I've forgotten the name of them exactly, but there is a scheme to introduce a heat network in that area, in this part of the city centre, and it would go towards the infrastructure needed for that. It's a project that the council is I don't know if we're leading on it, but we're heavily involved with in it to try and deliver more sustainable heating methods.
Go to One Energy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. It wasn't clear. There was a submission from the ecology officer and RSPB report suggesting that there should be 4 back boxes and 12 swift boxes. Are they going in? I didn't see that.
Yes, they are
Okay,
going
great.
in, and
That's
they're
nice.
on the most recent plans.
Fantastic. Okay. There is a tree shown that then has sort of become a planter with seating around it. So in some depictions, it's a tree. In some, it's a planter. I mean, you won't get a tree like the one depicted in a planter. And the whole area, we've sort of talked about design standards and congruence with John Lewis and the frontage, you know, the whole area's got you showed it in one of your slides earlier, got a line of London plains, which are a very suitable tree for sort of this part of the country in urban settings. And a planter just doesn't provide that sort of kind of same ambience as a street tree. Has it been explored? I mean, you know, I'm not a fan of planters myself. Has it been explored, the idea, rather than putting a planter in there, having a tree that is congruent with the other trees that are already there?
So the landscape plan that was on the screen, that was just an indicative drawing. So the detail of it will be secured by a condition, and we'll be running it through with our urban designer, with our ecologists, with whoever else needs to be involved with it to make sure it is the appropriate design for that location.
Oh, okay. I would strongly favour a tree for sure. And the other thing then is kind of links in is the biodiversity money. You know, it's not a biodiverse site. There's some buddleia and some scrub there. It's just it's you know sort of weeds essentially. You know that are on the site from a sort of derelict area. The biodiversity money is going off site. You know, is it possible to tie it in off-site, being outwards the perimeter of the site, but is it possible to tie it within the local area, or is it to schemes that the builder, the developer sort of you know a fund somewhere and it goes off somewhere else? Is it possible to tie it into the area, if not the site itself? You know, obviously putting in a tree will be more expensive than putting in a planter, and it might be some leverage to getting a better outcome in the street scene just immediately that's already been highlighted.
So the biodiversity net gain is being dealt with through the credit system, and which they would buy credits which would be delivered by a separate organisation, an approved organisation for it. So we wouldn't necessarily have any say on exactly which site that credit went to. What tends to happen with it is that it's one of the least preferred options in the scale of it, so they have to actually pay a bit more than they would if they'd been able to deliver it on site. But unfortunately, we don't have any control over it.
I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you. That's very clear. And then just the last thing was about cycle storage. There's a report, I think, from the sort of citing that very few of the PBSA residents tend to use cycling, and so I think it was used as a sort of a lever to sort of provide less cycle storage on the site. So I think the recommended was something like 60 or another 40. I can't quite remember the exact figure, but you know, the offer is low. Now, there aren't many, though all facilities for the students are pretty much available in that spot. A lot of the campuses are remote. You know, there's St Luke's, which is a wee hike across Newtown, and then there's the main campus at Sydenham, which is again a bit of a walk. You know, is the feeling that having a below sort of ratio cycle storage a sort of good precedent, or any thoughts?
It is unfortunate that it is below the SPD recommended levels. However, DCC Highways were consulted on this particular aspect and found that that level would be acceptable based on the evidence submitted in terms of usage. We would expect a travel plan, well, there is a travel plan condition that we put in to try and promote this, and we would hope that should there be an oversupply of to so many cyclists using it, that the developers would find space within the site to increase it as needed.
Thank you. I read the DCC submission, which suggested to me that 48 should be a condition, and I think the actual offer was lower than that. So I would like that to be followed up if that's possible, just for clarity outside the meeting, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ketchin. Any other members with questions? Councillor Ralston.
I'm not sure if I have now, because I think they might have been asked, but can I just flick quickly through? Yes, there is one question. Again, thank you for your report and the detail in it. As we have discussed, there's a previous application for this site in 2020, and the difference is that that wouldn't now meet code standard. This planning application, are the differences purely to meet those requirements, or has the design review happened in between them as well? Does that make sense? I wasn't sure it made sense.
So as far as I'm aware with it, the site was sold to new owners who then started looking into the increased building safety requirements with it. And as part of that, they contacted the council, which is where we started the pre-app process and the design review panel with them. Alongside that, they have to submit things to the building safety regulator, which is sort of another bit that doesn't necessarily get involved in our pre-application, but that's all. It all sort of happened at the same time because each part of it influences the other. The building safety requirements are a lot stricter now, and that is partly why there has had to be an increase in massing to accommodate an extra lift and things like that that's needed for this height of building.
Thank you. And then I've got one more question, which goes back to the Queen's Crescent Gardens. And that is, I hear what you're saying, that there's no precedent for there to be any condition with PBSAs. Is that just because it's just never been done before, or because it can't be?
So it would be that it wouldn't meet the tests that we place on any planning contribution, that there has to be a need to outweigh the planning harm being created by it. In this instance, because they have access to the facilities at the university, that would provide mitigation, and improvements to other sites wouldn't be reasonable to meet those tests.
Thank you, Councillor Ralston. Any other members with questions? Can I just suggest that before we move into debate, we just have a very brief pause? My throat is suffering and I need to get a glass of water. If anybody else wishes to do so, we're just pausing for literally 2 minutes, please. Thank you. Break, if we could come back to order, please. Right, thank you, members. We now move into that stage where we debate, and so I am throwing it over to the floor. I have Councillor Hughes first.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to just acknowledge the really excellent points that were raised by Councillor Palmer. I do think Councillor Palmer brought up some really useful things to consider. However, I think as a planning committee, my understanding is that we sort of need to consider each application on its own merit as an individual application. So whilst I completely understand the point she was raising, and I think there was some excellent information given to us, I'm not sure how it's sort of relevant to this one individual application. The location feels ideal for PBSA. I mean, I know that area really well. It's absolutely chocker with late night drinking venues. So who else is going to want to live right next door to those, is my thinking. And I think looking at it, particularly from this angle, it is still a lot lower than that very tall point of reference that is John Lewis that you can see from most parts of the city. It just kind of nestles in with it. So, you know, page 24 clearly shows us that environmental health haven't raised objections. So I'm sort of thinking that I'm not sure what grounds I can find to reject it, because, you know, on planning terms. And that's the job before us tonight, isn't it? I would just want to say, in my humble opinion, I hope that the management plan is really robust and it does include something about taking care of the medieval wall, because I'm actually a little bit concerned about how we protect that medieval wall from the drunk shenanigans that are likely to happen if it's in the garden or very close vicinity of a purpose-built student accommodation block. I wouldn't want to see drunk graffiti on it. You know, I wouldn't want to see it damaged because it's not been taken care of. So if there is any way you have any kind of power to include that in the management plan, I'd love to see that. And the point that I already raised about cars, if that could also, I mean, you know, I realise you have limited power, but that would be my humble request if it's possible. But yeah, I don't see how we can argue against this now.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. And I do apologise if I cover some of the areas that Councillor Palmer covered, but I will point out that we've had no discussions or any discussions at all, because I, as a member of the planning committee, do not get involved with other ward councillors on issues coming before this committee. And could I point out that it was our request that brought this to delegated briefing initially, and could I thank those, the chair and the vice chair at delegated briefing, believing this was important enough to come to this committee this evening to discuss. Whilst there is an extant permission on the site from 2015 for a PBSA, the history has been littered with changes and variations. The 2020 application was, in fact, as described in the planning document, a change in internal layout, not an entirely new application. So I think there's a danger of thinking they started again in 2020. No, it was a continuation of the 2015. And having been on this council, I have tried to bring variations to delegated briefing. When we've gone to delegated briefing, we found we have no powers to stop the variations that took place in the previous application. So therefore, this evening, we start with a clean sheet and must determine this application in relation to the situation in 2025, not 2015. The council developed a policy of the 2011 local plan to encourage PBSA development for Exeter University students, and indicated that sites on the campus and around the city centre were appropriate. Many such PBSAs have been built in the vicinity of Sidwell Point, and this was an element of Sidwell Point's business plan to encourage students to use that facility. But to the community, we as a council often seem to be behind the curve, be it HMOs, Article 4 or whatever. We were reactive rather than proactive. New PBSAs have been built, but the number of HNOs, as Councillor Palmer said, has not declined significantly, as the university has increased student numbers. It's always been ahead of the game on numbers as far as we're concerned. The problem is the student number data from the university is not robust or even current. There's a difference between FTE equivalents, full-time students, and many part-time students included within the statistics. We are all aware from the press the national trend of declining university numbers, especially regarding international students. And as we're aware from the officer's report, the university has not commented upon the need for this private development. Looking afresh at this site in 2025, what for me is both a ward representative and a member on the planning committee are the sort of key considerations in planning terms that I need to think about. Is there a need for additional PBSA developments in Exeter? And is this the most suitable location, irrespective of what the local plan says? What impact does this PBSA have in regard to community balance? The point of order, is it?
No,
Oh. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Yvonne, I thought you. I thought it wasn't that exciting. All right. What impact does this PBSA have in regard to community balance as defined within the neighbourhood plan and the local plan? And I will read out those two in case Councillor Hughes is unclear what it means. This is the local plan. The proposal will not create an over-concentration of the use in any one area of the city, which would change the character of the neighbourhood and create an imbalance in the local community. If we then go to the St James local plan, when it talks about large-scale purpose-built student accommodation, it says it will be permitted where it does not affect predominantly characterised by intact terraced housing of 2 and 3 stories. I suggest you look further along Lombok Street, where the servicing and parking requirements could be achieved without unacceptable impact, and where the scale and massing, look at your picture, of any proposed build accommodation would broadly be similar to surrounding buildings. Look down Longbrook Street. And does the plan as submitted enhance or diminish the local design balance in the area? Those are my key considerations. Within the Dewey St James ward, there are currently approved and starting to be built 1,600 bed spaces. Not 100, 1,600 are already planned and being developed on the West Park and the former Johnson Laundry site. Since 2015, sites that were formerly commercial offices in this same area have been converted to PBSAs. You look at the building opposite, which was an insurance office, now a PBSA. You look down the road to the offices are there, though they haven't managed to complete their planning and put the new front on they promised, is now currently a PBSA down there. So the character of the area has changed. The intention of PBSA development close to the city centre was to remove an over-concentration of students away from Dewey or St James, or effectively St James at that time when the plan was, or the St James ward. If this is approved, we're going yet again to add more in the St James part of the city and not in other parts. And my concern is, in light of the economic factors affecting universities, we might end up with a dormant site here for some years, as we do with some of the co-living sites. Community balance is still an aspect of our local plan, as I already mentioned, and the St James plan, as I've mentioned. And when promoting our Article 4 policy, which came in as a result of a petition from residents in Pennsylvania ward about maintaining community balance, the reason for having HMOs registered. Regarding HMO, the percentage definition used by Exeter City Council is 20%, which is a national agreed definition in relation to HMOs. So if it works for HMOs, surely a similar figure is what you should be looking for in relation to PBSAs. According to the quoted figures of population in Exeter, that means not just that Dewey St James is imbalanced, the whole city technically is imbalanced with the number of students we've got in relation to the long-term resident population. And of course, there is an over-concentration, as Councillor Palmer said, close to the university, which happens to be the Dewey St James ward. And why is this, why is this concept important? Because some people seem, oh, you're anti-student, that's the approach. No, it's not. It's about maintaining communities and community resilience. Students add to a community. They keep my local shop open, usually from 10 o'clock to midnight buying alcohol, but they keep it open. So I'm there in the morning if I want a pint of milk or whatever. If they weren't there, that shop would close. So I recognize there are an economic and a lively attitude, bring a lively attitude to our communities. The problem is when you get the imbalance of students within a given community and the impact that has on other services for long-term residents, be it GP services, be it schools, particularly primary schools, where numbers are declining because of the change in the catchment area. That's why it's important, particularly in the St. James area. When I last looked at council tax data for my ward, over 50% of the properties then, and that was 2 to 3 years ago, in St. James, were student council tax exempt. So already 50% of the properties in our ward are student occupied. It does have an impact on the nature of sustaining communities, and PBSAs are included in that, because as we're all aware, they're liable for council tax, but don't actually pay anything and not liable for business rates. A recent appeal was quoted by the officer about allowing a PBSA against the refusal of this committee. And you'll remember we had this in Howell Road, and I didn't take part because I only live 40 yards or 35 meters from the development. And many of us were concerned about the interpretation that the planning inspector had taken in regard to our ruling as a committee and as a council. He defined community balance in relation to the type of buildings, not the occupants of the buildings. In other words, there were only 3 or 4 BBSAs within the area, therefore another PBSA was all right. Whereas in fact, he ignored the argument we were trying to put, was the number of students living in the area, and PBSAs are intended for students. That increases the density of students in a given area and affects community balance. And as has already been mentioned, there was a further application in Pennsylvania Road where an inspector did quote community balance as one of the reasons for accepting our agreement as a committee, or an official one, I think that was, that it should be refused. They went to appeal and they lost at appeal. And the element that the inspector looked on was the St. James neighbourhood plan and community balance and student numbers in that area of Pennsylvania Road. Any of you who go up to Pennsylvania Road, up to the traffic lights, will know it is row upon row of HMOs in that area. Therefore, I believe that this application would lead to an over-concentration of this type of development within its immediate area, which wasn't present in 2015, when those others were still office blocks, to the detriment of community balance. This area, I believe, must be maintained for mixed use dimensions as originally planned, and we must overall try to avoid creating a city of students within a city. My third point is regarding the detail of the application, which I believe is overpowering to the existing design fabric of the area. The John Lewis, formerly Debenhams, and for some of us old enough, the Bobbies, is a landmark building in Exeter. It is still seen as a landmark building in Exeter. The Old King Billy, whilst no architectural masterpiece, I think we can all agree on that. Well, it might be the odd person, but I think most of us would agree that it was no masterpiece, made no attempt to overshadow this keystone building for the city centre. And following our leader last weekend, if I might quote the King on this, or paraphrase the King, I think this development is a carbuncle on the side of a much-loved building. It would be out of keeping with the surrounding buildings. All the other buildings that were PBSAs and have converted since 2015 have maintained their existing height and their existing structure. So therefore, they have kept the original intent of height and massing within the area. The application does also bring out issues. The growth in pedestrian and traffic movement in this junction has increased tremendously since 2015. And I walk across there and drive around it quite frequently. And the idea of another a minimum of 100 plus people on that tight pedestrian areas at some times is worrying for those pedestrians, I think. And also, as Councillor Hughes has already pointed out, we're told it is car free. But those of us who have any interest in the area around Exmouth Junction will kindly know that that is causing issues there. That doesn't prevent students bringing cars to Exeter, and the university refuse to do anything about it. Simply, they say it's not their job to stop it. Others have mentioned in their comments issues regarding amenity space for students. And yet again, I do find it interesting that there is no amenity space on the site, but yet we can't get a contribution to the nearest area of amenity space, which they would then use, because they will somehow go 2 or 3 miles further onto the university, where there's plenty of open grass space there. I note the comment on heritage. I will point out on the 22nd of November 2023, I had to report the demolition of the rear wall to the heritage officer for builders to gain access to the site to carry out demolition work. They simply demolished it, and we had to fight hard for them to hang on to the stones, or some of the stones, that they'd knocked down. We might also be told, presumably, about the issue of 5-year housing supply. Might be a consideration. But I assume if there's an extant permission on this site for 97 units, and we're going to 100 and just over 100 units on this site, we can't double count both applications. So presumably one will just supersede the other. So therefore the impact will be marginal. I will not be supporting the recommendation. I can do nothing about the 2015 decision, but I can do something about this 2025 application. I believe this is overdevelopment of the site. The design takes away from the integrity of the existing buildings in the area. The massing is overpowering. The development conflicts with the principles of maintaining community balance within the former St James ward. And clearly, I think there's a need for Exeter to look more clearly to identify a number of sites in the wider Exeter area to allow for the dispersal of students within the Exeter boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, thank you. Just let us remember that Exeter City is the economic powerhouse it is because of the existence of Exeter University. And the report outlines that there has been a considerable increase in the number of students, and whether they're part-time or full-time, they will need places to live during term time. And I know this site extremely well, site of the pub there. It was never there for accommodation purposes, it was there as a pub. It's next to the biggest retail shop in Exeter. And I have to agree with Councillor Hughes that this, on the face of it, is an actually ideal place for students to be, right at the centre of nightlife, and next to a big shop, next to all the retail outlets, which they will no doubt frequent, and create economic good trading for that particular locality. And Councillor Mitchell said that, you know, it's not an ideal site, but next to it is a row of retail shops. It's next to in that immediate vicinity, it's all retail apart from PBSA opposite it. So you have to go right down past the dentist to get to any accommodation, residential accommodation, which is laid back in its own surroundings, and I think quite discreet and quite separate from this edge of the ward in the city centre location. Much has been made about the community. Well, you're looking, I'm a person who lives 100 metres from 5 PBSAs, 200 metres from another 2 very big, large PBSAs, and we're looking at another one coming forward in the near future. For somebody who actually lives in an area which is not in this ward, but the next ward, so it is shared around, actually students are not a problem. These PBSAs, like this one, was built on office accommodation or former print works or the former magistrates court, or some have been there for a number of years. So they're not taking up accommodation or of land that, you know, was ever there for housing. So that has got a lot in its benefit to promote it for. And I can't say that the presence of those 7 student accommodation has affected the community I live in, and which is also not a million miles away from this. You know, students are the ones that live in the locality, are lovely people. And we're not, Councillor Mitchell says, you know, this is a clean sheet. It's not a clean sheet. We have to comply with planning laws, and we gave planning permission to this twice. And this is slightly different because of the building regulations, so it has to come forward again. And so the arguments really for turning this down simply are not there. We've interrogated the officers about design, about height, all of these, and the community development. And I cannot see legal reasons for turning this down in this particular location. And you've cited, Councillor Mitchell cited this about HMOs. Well, the officers did explain, well, HMOs are under a different regime, C3, C2, and also controlled by Article 4 direction. So it's not comparable. We can't compare PBSAs with HMOs. And it may be, for all I know, given that Councillor Palmer said that there were 8 HMOs that were on the market. Obviously, there is, whatever's going on is having an impact on HMOs, and landlords want to get rid of them. So maybe some of those that are on the market could return to community homes. But as Councillor Harding said earlier, we have to deal with this application that's before us. We can't say we prefer something else there, because this is land owned by somebody who wants to put a BPSA here, and as long as it was in the law, the guidance, the planning regulations and all that, we cannot turn it down with good reasons. And I think my last point was section 1 agreements, but I can't read my writing now. Sorry, section 106 agreements. So yes, I'll have to leave it there. But you know, change is difficult. But in this location, we want change because it's an eyesore, as has been said. And it's been an eyesore for a number of years. We need this development to go ahead. And if we have students in this location, I think it will be a positive benefit for the community, for the nightlife and the retail sector of the high street, as it's literally 100 yards. Well, it's not even 20 metres from the high street, isn't it? And access via King William round the back there. And as already been saying, in terms of parking, they won't get parking permits because they're students, and it won't pertain to here. So if they do bring cars into the city, they'll have to go to the city council car parks, which will be money for us. And if these students have got enough money to bring cars in and park in the city centre, that's absolutely fine. And this is a location, football has been the other one, it's a city centre location. We encourage people to come into our city centre to spend money and make the area richer. And you know, people walk up and down past that building all the time, and I don't think there is going to be a significant impact. And Devon County Council has not said there will be a significant impact on the highways, pedestrians, or roads if the development goes ahead. So I cannot see any reason for turning it down. Subject to 106.
Councillor Atkinson. I have Councillor Harding next.
Thank you. Yeah, I've listened to all the points and discussion with interest, and without repeating the point Councillor Atkinson has just made, that what we have before us here is a PBSA. It's not a, there's no chance of it being a residential block. So whether we like that or not, that's not really on the table, and not something we can be looking at today. And with the precedent set by previous schemes, I think it'd be hard now to say that we can't have this scheme when the previous two, which were of similar size and massing, were allowed. I note the point that was made earlier. These schemes haven't returned HMOs to residential use, but then I wonder how much that is due to the fact that there's, over the last 20 years, 20,000 extra students have come to Exeter. So the numbers have gone up so much that those HMOs are largely still in use. But if it wasn't for buildings like this, then how much more stress would that be putting on the residential housing stock as more students are arriving? And I think the fact that they've got I mean, maybe it's a bit of a grey area, but there is an outstanding application which they could revert to if they didn't have this one anyway, because that one is still allowed, although it's noted that they'd have to take some action to amend some of the regulation, or to meet the regulations. I noted also in the officer report that it says that it could be changed to other accommodation if student numbers did fall. So I think that's relevant as well, but it could be used for other things, whether that be, I mean, what that would be, I don't know exactly, but I guess some kind of residential use, and that the applicant has worked positively with the officers. Although I do think it's a shame they haven't come tonight, because I think it would be nice to be able to ask them some questions. So I think it's regretful that they haven't come to answer questions, but they haven't. And I note, I listened with interest actually to Councillor Mitchell's points about it not matching Longbrook Street, and I do tend to agree with that. But if you look down Longbrook Street, then yeah, it doesn't match what's there. But then if you look at the 4 points of that crossroad there, with I think it's called Roman Gate and the old insurance building and the building diagonally opposite it, that they are all quite large multi-story buildings of a similar kind of design. And I think with this one, it does help the fact that where the terrace of shops meets it in Longbrook Street, it is stepped, so it doesn't go up just in one big step, and it is significantly lower than John Lewis as well. So I think that's significant. And my other point was, yeah, the officer's report says that it's not an over-concentration of development. So the definition that we look at, if it's not by definition over-concentration, I think we have to take account of that. But my last point as well was, I think it's regretful that no money has been made for Queen's Crescent Gardens, because I think that's something that would have helped local residents quite a bit of that if we could have put some money into that. But then whether that's the city council has decided in their negotiations that's not where they wanted the money. So, but that again isn't on the table for this, I suppose. But yeah, that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. I have Councillor Ralston next.
Thank you. I'm waiting patiently again. So I have 2 points. The first one is to pick up on something that Councillor Mitchell said about the expansion of PBSAs in the area since 2015, and the conversion of some of the other buildings, which amounts to the overpopulation of PBSAs. However, there was planning permission for PBSA on this site, and therefore, by that measure, when the planning permissions were granted for the other buildings, surely that would have been considered as part of the numbers of PBSA around. So I feel like that cancels itself out, because if you were objecting to something being converted the other side of the road, part of the objection would surely be, but there's going to be another 100 units over here. And though that has met the planning conditions, which is what we're looking at here, I do agree with what others have said about that this seems the right place for this. I think also the point about having, an increase in the pedestrian and crossings and things with the amount of students. I don't know if any of you have ever met a student, but they very rarely are visible during rush hour, and don't all go to the same lectures at the same times. So it's it's not like a school where they're all going to be going in and leaving at the same time. So I don't feel like the 100-ish amount is going to overly impact on that junction, which has actually already got quite good crossing points on it anyway. And then my other point is again about the Queen's Crescent Gardens, that I understand why legally it doesn't meet the test for having any section 106 against it, but I would like to hope that the developers perhaps they're not watching it, we're going to watch it back, and may consider that morally it would be something to think about again, perhaps as a way to support the local community. And I appreciate that there isn't anything that we can do to put that in place. But I think that just mirrors what the rest of us are feeling, and that is the tricky part of being on planning, is that you have to look at things with a planning focus on, and so that there are sometimes other parts of it that actually don't fall within those planning constraints, that we therefore, even if we have an opinion about them, we can't in the decision making, and that's what's important here. So I am supporting this this evening, and I think that the work that the team have done as well with the design to get it from, again, that old picture we saw of 2015 to this one is a vast improvement, and as Councillor Harding said, will fit that four-way crossroad buildings much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ross and Councillor Ketchen.
Lots of good points made. Thank you for the presentation, Chris. My feelings on it are it's congruent with the surrounding area. It's going to be no comfort at all to the St James neighbourhood that it's on the absolute margins of the area that comes under the St James neighbourhood plan. But I think, you know, it's always about balance and trade-offs and weighted decisions. And I think when I look at this site, it does remind me, as Councillor Atkinson suggested, of St Sidwell's Point and what's happened there, and the fact that there's some congruent building going on and developments, and one was approved last year in a similar fashion because it's in keeping with that area. Now, there's a real issue about over concentration and the loss of a sense of community. I think if this was in the middle of St James, we'd be having a very different conversation. I feel it's very much in keeping with the city centre development. It just so happens St James is a city centre neighbourhood, but this is, I don't feel, going to detrimentally affect the core of St James neighbourhood. I feel it's sufficiently far away, in the same way that Councillor Atkinson's mentioned, the print works and the likes are sufficiently far away from Newtown that this is a good use of the space. There's just a couple of loose, couple of tie-up comments I would add. Is I do think there's some details still to be addressed. One is how the street scene plays out with regard to the planting. I would like that considered. I think I made my point on that already. I think DCC did make a point that the cycle storage should be higher, and I would like that revisited if that's allowable. But I think the big takeaway from this, for me, or the bigger loose end, is why is PBSA exempt in the way it has been? There was a real opportunity here to get some money for amenity spaces, and I don't accept the argument that for the 108 students that may live here, there is that Streatham campus or St Luke's campus are places to mill around and places to live in. Yes, there's some gym facilities at either and the Students' Union at one, but you know, their day-to-day living is going to be around this neighbourhood. This is their home, and your home is not your workplace. What we're talking about is the campuses are their workplace. This is their home. So I think there's a missed opportunity around PBSA about how we have that their contributions reflected into the infrastructure that we aim to have to improve the neighbourhoods where these homes are going in.
Thank you, Councillor Ketchen. Councillor Banyard.
Thank you. So this is a key city centre site, and I think everyone agrees it should be developed rather than left as a whole. Students are welcome in Exeter. They are positive for this city. It is welcome that we've got some space around the back for the city wall to breathe. I take issue with comments heard tonight that that drunk students might damage the city wall, or that they don't get up early, so they won't be involved in the morning rush hour. I work as an academic note taker, and there are plenty of students there for their 8:30 AM lectures. I think students today are professional and serious because student fees mean there is a lot at stake for them. I also really like the tree bench idea proposed outside John Lewis for the students to get some fresh air. I think that's a great idea. We should populate across the city centre in general. For me, what is counting against this plan is the weight on the community balance issue. And this seems to be the difficult thing, that we've heard that already more than 50% of residents in St James are students. On the list of consultees, the university has not commented on the need for this development. It's interesting that it's missing from the list of from that list. Robin Connett of the St James's Forum is equally worried about community balance. Councillor Palmer argued that community balance has already been tested with a case of the garden extension to an HMO, where the inspector ruled that the area was unbalanced. The officers have told us that that judgment just concerned HMOs, and so doesn't apply in this case. But just because that was an HMO and we're discussing a PBSA, I cannot see that that would change an inspector's mind about community balance in St James. And I believe if we voted against this development and it was to be challenged, that decision would provide a precedent to back up this committee. So it seems clear to me that this development will result in increasing the already unbalanced community in St James, and so I'm reluctant to support it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other comments before I make a contribution? So I agree with the concept that a PBSA is a suitable building to put in this plot. I've got several issues with the actual design itself. I had hoped that it would be more stepped going down Longbrook Street. I accept the fact that the existing application is showing a height that is the same as this, but I am a little bit concerned about the massing. Seems to me to be much more blocky. And I'm also very concerned about the internal design. The rooms inside are tiny, and there is a wheelchair accessible space, a studio, on every floor. But again, one of the reasons why this massing is such is because of the fire regulations, and that is in the event of a fire, that student has to stay in place until rescued, because obviously the lifts aren't used in the event of fires. So there are quite a few aspects of the actual design and things like that that disturb me. But I will point out the developer was here and was wanting to speak, but unfortunately was not allowed to speak by me because they had not followed procedure in order to be able to register as a speaker. Otherwise, you would have heard from the developer. I would like to ask legal to explain to the committee the reason why we can't add a clause in or make a request that there is a financial contribution for a local amenity space. Are you prepared to give that opinion? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, Chair, planning obligations assist in mitigating the impact of unacceptable development to make it acceptable in planning terms. And planning obligations can only constitute a reason for granting planning permission if they meet the legal tests as set out in Regulation 122, which are as follows. They have to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms and directly related to the development, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So officers have identified that there's as a result of students being able to access other amenity spaces, for example, on the campus, that there's no identified planning harm that needed to be mitigated or sufficient enough in any event to generate planning harm. And secondly, we have no information relating to monies needed or requested by any third-party organisation, how that would be valued, how that would be spent. And so again, it's difficult for members tonight to be able to insist on that where there's no monies accounted for in any way, and there's no policy support for that. If members were to go on and insist a form of planning obligation, it would, of course, be something that the planning applicant could not agree to, in a sense, appeal for a non-determination, and we'd be in an appeal situation as well. So where we'd have to defend that position. So that's just some of my thoughts, Chair, on some of the how it relates to the planning obligations test.
Thank you very much indeed. Unless any other members have contributions to make, I now cede to the Strategic Director of Place. Oh.
Thank you, Chair. It's my job to try and sum up the conversations that we've heard this evening. I think that I would do that. There's three key questions really that you're considering. Is there a need for more student houses in Exeter? That's the first one. Is this in the right place, the right location? And is the design acceptable? From my hearing, those are the three questions that you've been considering. So there's absolute evidence of an unmet demand for student accommodation in Exeter. And it's very clear that the city centre is the council's preferred location for that. You may not be aware, but I'm aware because I'm in regular contact with the university. The West Park scheme that some of you will remember that was discussed here at length, that's going ahead. That's a 260 million development that the university is committing on its site in Streatham. Now, this is a really important point. The university's policy is to house first-year students on site, on campus. So that's a clear indication that it feels it's investing probably the biggest amount of investment since Princess Hay was developed in new student accommodation. The other thing to say about that is that the university and the students that come to the university make a huge contribution to Exeter's economy, both in terms of the general GVA, but also in terms of vitality and viability of the city centre. We've heard lots of businesses depend on the income that they get from students spending money in the area. So that's the issue about need. Second issue is about having established that, is this in the right location? Well, pretty sure that everybody in this room knows this site really well. That's because it's right in the city centre. So we walk past it every day. And as I've said, the clear policy of this council is to locate new student accommodation as close, if not within the city centre as possible. Now, what's the reason for that? It's because it's within the city centre that those students have access to all the facilities that they need. It means they don't need to own or drive a car, and they can get to their classes and their lectures very easily by walking or cycling. So, in other words, it's a sustainable location. Now, the third issue is about, or the issue about location is also an issue about local community and local impact. And we've heard, and we do consistently hear about words like over-concentration, imbalance, and this is not the right area. That they're actually legitimate concerns, but they're also really difficult to define and quantify. Planning inspectors have tried to do that. Policy has tried to do that. It's actually really difficult. It's a really complex issue. So perhaps rather than looking at a pure what is over concentration, it's perhaps better to look at what is the issue that sits behind that perceived level of over concentration. And what I've heard tonight, it's mainly about the cohesion, the community cohesion that an over concentration of a particular type of people or person will bring. And that usually then translates into things like perhaps antisocial behaviour, noise and disturbance, just generally feeling that the neighbourhood has been changed. So what I would say is this development, like all purpose-built student accommodation and actually co-living accommodation, the one thing that sets it apart from, say, standard apartments or build to rent, it's professionally managed. So there's very clear rules about people who occupy those apartments, those rooms rather, and the council through its policies and through its management plans can secure those measures to ensure that any impact on community cohesion, on imbalance or concentration can be properly mitigated. Now, it just so happens that this council and the officers that work in city development are incredibly experienced in this sort of thing because there's been so many of them over the years. So you can rely on the officers in their judgment and also in their experience of handling this sort of application, that we will ensure that those measures are properly imposed and implemented and then monitored thereafter. And this is our day-to-day jobs. This is what we do day to day for these kinds of developments. So the third issue really was about design. Now, I would say as well that whilst this is a gap site and a significant ISO, that shouldn't itself justify any form of development. It's got to be high quality. Now, your officers in the report made it really clear that there's already a precedent for a very tall building in this location, and that's commenced, although it can't be built because of, as you've heard, it's because of the building regulations, particularly the fire escape requirements, which has meant that the new applicant or the new developer has had to revisit the whole design. But what that's offered is an opportunity to revisit the design. We've heard terms like clean slate and looking at this fresh. And your officers have done that, and they've worked really hard. The team has spent many hours negotiating, looking at the scheme, looking to see how it can be improved, working with the design review panel, etc. So they have actually secured significant improvements. Now, it doesn't, to my mind, look and feel that different from many other types of student accommodation. It's a typical kind of design, but it doesn't feel, doesn't look, you just have to look at that picture, it's not out of keeping with what it is, which is a city centre location. So those are the three issues. That's my summing up of those issues. Obviously, you've now got to decide on those issues in the way that you normally do and consider those. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Director. It now falls on me to move the motion. I move the motion that we delegate to the service lead to grant permission subject to the completion of a legal agreement as listed with the points there. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ralston, thank you. Right, in that case, I now move to a vote on this motion in front of you. Will those in favour please indicate by raising?
That's 9 in favour.
Will those against please indicate?
2 against.
Are there any abstentions? I believe not. I think the numbers add up to 11.
That's great. That's admit it. Those numbers. That's not 9 for, 2 and 2 against. So those recommendations have been carried.
So that delegation has carried. Thank you very much indeed for your attention on this matter. We move on our agenda now. We're on agenda item number 6. This is the list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. You have had this list with you to go through. Can I ask if any members have any questions relating to that list of decisions made? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. it's just a quick one on page 83. When and it's more about process, I think, the question, just so that we're all clear on how this works. If an HMO puts in an application to convert, so I'm looking at the delegated decision 11 Richmond Court, if they want to remove the garage door and replace it with a new wall and a window, does that automatically mean they can then just put a human being in that new space, or would they have to come back to the council to get specific permission to extend the number of occupants within the existing HMO? Thank you. That's it.
It's a little bit complex, but it would depend. There's two routes of it. So there would be the HMO licensing side of things, which separate from us. So they would probably be required to get a new license for that increased number. In the planning side of things, it would depend on the number of occupants in the property. If it's between 3 and 6, then you can have 3, 4, 5, or 6 under class C4. If it goes to more than 6, then it becomes a sui generis HMO, and any change to that, so if they went from, say, 6 to 7, or if they went from 7 to 8, then they would need a new planning permission for it, because they're permitted only for that very specific use, that number of bedrooms in that instance.
Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, 2 Woodville Road.
Page number first, please.
Page number 67. It's the bottom of the page. This is a 67, yeah. This is a retrospective application, so it's already been built. Just ask what the reasons were for turning it down, and does this mean that the owner has got to now take down what they've done and revert to the original planning permission?
Are you prepared to comment on that, or do you want to give a written? I think we need to take that away because the officer who explained that, so they will provide you with a written decision. Thank you. Councillor Councillor Hardy.
Thank you. This one here, on page 68, the second one down on page 68, the Arthur Cross store. Being in my ward, I thought I ought to know what I've got no idea what Arthur Cross store is. Is it possible you can?
Is it?
Is that what it is?
I don't know.
Oh, maybe that's what it means.
I assumed it was Sainsbury's, was it?
Right, maybe. Is that all right? Yeah, because
if you submit that, well, it's been noted now, so a response will be given to you in writing.
So I didn't do anything else. That's
no.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Banyard.
Just a curiosity that there's no cases here from Exwick ward. Is it the case that there were no planning decisions in Exwick, or have they not been included?
Nothing happens in Exwick, Councillor Banyard. I would suggest that there were no applications in the ward within the timescale of this report. Councillor Ketchen, I believe.
Page 77, application 0860. It's a split decision. What does that mean in planning terms? Sorry, page 77, top of application 0860, decision, split decision. Is that no decision? What does?
We had that similar question, didn't we, last time? So it's quite rare, quite unusual. So you can have a split decision where some aspects are approved and some are refused. There's a kind of mechanism for that.
And my other one was on the following page 78 regarding County Hall 0996. It says ECC raise objections. This application, I thought, hadn't come through ECC. In what capacity can ECC raise objections? Because it's actually a DCC internal county matter. And, you know, for people who haven't been on county council, there's an oddity that county council seems to be able to allow its own planning permissions for certain limited things, particularly at county hall. So can you just explain what raise objections means and does it lead to anything?
So so the county council is a local planning authority in its own right. It can make certain decisions, and in those situations we're a statutory consultee, so we're asked to make comments, but we're not the determining authority. I don't know the specific circumstances around that one and why officers raised objections to that. I don't know whether, but that's the process.
Any other? Oh, Councillor Ralston.
Sorry, we were forming the same question as the Cogswoods. I said this might be for a discussion outside, but does that mean that DCC could build whatever they wanted to on the county hall site? I don't understand why when it's in our city, but I'm happy to take that outside of the meeting. That's more for my brain thinking than any actual relevance here.
I would say exactly that. I'll make a ruling as the chair that that is not in decisions made, and I'm sure the director will have a communication with it.
It's worth reassuring them that this will have to go through a proper process. They're not, you know, they can't just grant themselves planning permission without going through a process. That's really reassuring. Yeah.
Sorry, my brain was going all over the place then.
Thank you, members. Right. Are there any other questions relating to decisions made? Right. We're now moving on to agenda item number 7, which is the appeals report. Are there any questions related to the appeals report? I see Councillor Mitchell.
Report has changed from what it was, in that now as a member I have to go onto the website, use the link to find the appeal documentation, and previously, particularly where appeals were either upheld or dismissed, whatever they were, there was often an officer's comment on this report which was helpful to us to understand the context. That is now missing, or does it doesn't, or is it that it doesn't apply to any of these and it's still going to happen in future? Because at the moment I did one just a sample that took me to the appeals document. Yes, very good, but there was no officer summary or anything that should be brought to my attention. So I was just hoping in future we can have a format that does allow officers to bring any points to planning members' attention.
I think in this case they're probably the fact that they're all householder applications, and normally we do that summary. Yeah. It's usually pretty helpful.
So it hasn't disappeared. It's just
not definitely not disappeared. No.
Right. Okay, members. So if we now, if I get back to my original sheet, I believe we've got simply the date of the next meeting, which will be on Monday, the 6th of October. Okay, if you care to note that in your diaries. I look forward to seeing you then. I do thank you for your attention this evening. I think it has been an interesting and quite lively debate, and I do believe that we have really covered the matter well. Thank you very much for your input. Good night.